Hi, I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company, and I have in my hand a TWSBI Classic. And what I'm going to do with it today is completely take it apart and put it back together for you. Now this is going to be a long video, it's not going to be short, so go ahead and just grab a cup of coffee, whatever, sit back, relax, and just get ready to enjoy a nice lengthy video. No, really, I try to go into every detail that I can about taking this thing apart and putting it back together because I know it's easy to get halfway through taking this thing apart and you get stuck trying to put it back together. So I try to cover all the bases here in the video. So that's what I do today, taking apart the TWSBI Classic. So I'm looking to disassemble and reassemble my TWSBI Classic. Now why would I want to do this? Well, I'm a tinkerer, so I like to do it anyway just for fun. But it's also good when it comes time to clean out the pen or maintain it. Me personally, I like to clean it really thoroughly when I'm switching between ink colors. So I will usually completely disassemble my pens when I clean them. I get in the habit of doing that with most pens, especially if it's easy to disassemble, you know, like this pen is. So it's pretty straightforward, and I like to do that. Another reason to do that is because the mechanism inside of here can get a little bit stiff after a while. So it's a good idea to use some silicone grease and just kind of grease it up every now and then to keep things moving smoothly, really nicely, keep it feeling like new. So with that in mind, there's a couple of things here with the cap I want to point out. One of them is that there's an insert that's inside this cap, and that helps to seal up the nib. And so the tools that I want to use to get that thing out of there is very simple. It's just a rubber band and a pencil. There's several pens like this, you know, several the TWSBI Mini and the 580 would really benefit from this as well. You know, I've got those pens right here. They've got the same insert, and because they're clear, ink can get behind there and create kind of an eyesore. So you can use this same method for those. That's not so much an issue for the Classic here, but the concept is still the same. So all you got to do is take this pencil and wrap the rubber band around it like so. Hold it in place like that, and then you just stick it right into the cap of the pen and push it all the way in there. And then just kind of give it a twist as you're pulling it out, and it'll kind of catch on there, but as you're pulling it out, it should grab the insert, like so. There we go. So it's got the black insert on this pen, probably because it doesn't matter whether it's black or clear or whatever. And so this is the part that the nib is actually kind of mating up to, just like that, and it's going to seal it up. So that's what that does. You may want to pull this thing out and just clean every now and then. It's not entirely necessary since you can't see it, but there it is. Once you have the insert out of the cap, if you want to take the cap apart further, you can do that. You just need a screwdriver that's got a pretty long and pretty thin neck here. So just a regular flat screwdriver. And there's a screw in there, so you just got to kind of get it set in there, hold it pretty firmly, and you can unscrew that screw that's in there. So that just kind of holds it in place there, and that will allow you to take off the clip and the finial as well on the cap. I don't really know what purpose specifically this would serve unless you just wanted to, I don't know, just kind of fiddle around just to do it. Reassembling it is a little bit harder just because that screw is kind of tough. So you kind of hold it in place, the clip sets in there pretty easily, but then getting this screw in place is kind of more of the challenge. So you have to kind of like flip the screw around in there because it's going to want to flip upside down on you a lot. And then because it's a flat screwdriver and not a Phillips, it's a little tough to get this thing exactly in place. But let's see if I can easily do it here. Nope. Oh, I think I might have it. Oh, I got it. Okay, well that was a big giant waste of time. Anyway. Then all you got to do is just take and reinsert it. It's easier to do it without the rubber band in place. You stick that on your pencil, bam, put it in place. Easy peasy, your cap is reassembled. Okay, so I'm going to take off the nib unit. That's the easiest part. So this is something you might do a lot more often. If you've got the TWSBI Diamond 50 bottle and you want to fill from that thing, you want to take the nib unit off. If you're ever swapping nibs, if you ever just want to clean it out more thoroughly, you'll want to be able to take off this nib unit. However, it's a little tricky because if you just grab it by the grip here and start spinning it, this grip is going to spin forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and it's never going to take the nib unit off. And the reason is because there's threads in here that are attached to the top portion of the nib unit. So what you need to actually do is grab kind of that metal band right there, and that's what will get you to where you want to be. This part here, this is just going to spin for all eternity because there's nothing that's actually holding it in place except for the friction of when you have this thing screwed completely down. So that's something you want to be aware. I know a lot of people have emailed me about the 580 doing that, and it's kind of weirds them out a little bit. But anyway, that's it. And it does go on in one direction. So it's kind of, if you look at it, it's tapered ever so slightly in one direction. And if you go to put it on, there's a step right here on this metal piece, and there's an inset here on this piece. And you go to put it in place, it's going to mate up beautifully. If you have it the wrong way, when you go to install it, it's not going to go so well. You're going to go to install it on your pen, and it's not going to fit right. And if you have it in the right place, well, then that's going to fit right, and you're going to work. So you got to watch out for that. Now, more on the nib here. So this little metal piece, this slides right off like so. But if you look here, there's these little notches, or these little raised portions in 4 different places on the nib housing, this black part. And there's these little insets here, these little grooves that made up to those housings. And if you don't have it in the right place, it's going to stop you short, just like that. And if you try and jam it in place, you could risk possibly some damage to the nib housing. I doubt you'd do much damage. You'd probably just ruin the little raised portions there, but you want to just make sure not to push it too aggressively. What you want to do is you want to get it in place, and you want to kind of turn it, rotate it until it drops in place, just like that. That's when you know you've got those grooves in place there. And as you notice here, as I was pulling this thing off, there is a little O-ring here. I don't know functionally if that is entirely necessary, but hey, it's there. It's in place. It probably just helps to keep the thing, you know, there. There's no ink that's actually traveling through this portion or anything like that. Maybe it's, I imagine it's probably just there so that when you're filling the pen, you're not getting ink that's going past this metal part and going up into your grip section. So that's probably why that's there. So you want to just keep an eye on that. If you're going to be soaking the whole nib unit or anything like that, then you want to just make sure that you don't lose that O-ring. And then as far as the nib and the feed itself, theoretically, I know that this thing is friction fit and that it can pull out. However, I personally have not been able to do it without damaging my feed, so I would not recommend pulling the nib and the feed out of the TWSBI Classic. Just a little point of fact there, I would recommend not doing it on the TWSBI Mini as well. So then to reassemble the thing, you just get it in there, turn it until it hits that groove, bam. Make sure you have this thing in the right direction. You'll know as soon as you go to install it whether it's in the right place or not. Again, if you have it in the wrong place, it's going to feel very forced, and you do not want to force it. So you want it to be very natural. Voila, that's how it works. Okay, now to the meat of it here. This is the part that everybody wants to see. So you've got this body portion, and there's a piston mechanism inside here. The TWSBI Classic is a piston filling pen, so which means that the whole mechanism is built into it. It doesn't have a removable cartridge or a converter or anything like that. So the way that this thing operates is you have the filler knob that you're twisting, and as you're twisting this thing and it's moving away from the body of the pen, it has a piston seal that's inside that's moving away from it. So as this part is all the way out, the seal's all the way down. That's your filling position. And then as you're twisting this thing towards the pen, that means the seal is moving up. So that's, you're going to end up in your final position here as your pen has been filled with ink. That's what you're shooting for here. So to remove this thing, you're going to use the supplied TWSBI wrench, which I have right here. But before we get to that, I want to show you a neat little trick and something that'll come up a little bit later. So I have this toothpick here. And this toothpick is going to really come in handy. So I want to make sure that this filler knob is all the way up to the body so that my piston seal is all the way back. And I'm going to take this toothpick and I'm just going to stick it down until it hits that piston seal. And then I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm just going to mark it right at the top there so that I know right where it needs to be. And if you look at it, it's kind of in the middle of that toothpick a little bit. So I'm actually going to snap one end off the toothpick here just so I can tell the difference between the two ends of my toothpick. Okay, and I'm going to set that aside there, and I'm not going to do anything with it until later in the video. But if I want to remove this mechanism out of here, I just unscrew this, take the wrench, and it's going to fit onto this kind of indented portion onto the filling mechanism, like so. I'm going to turn it in a clockwise motion, like so, and just give it a few turns. You can also hold this and you can turn the body of the pen. That works just as well if you don't want to be wildly spinning this thing. And you're going to spin it for a while, and then eventually you're just going to pull this thing out of there. And there's the mechanism inside of there. Now, I know some of you are probably going to end up in this position where you have this filler knob all the way out, and you will go to remove this pen off of here, this mechanism out of the pen, and what's going to happen is your piston rod is going to be left inside of the pen. Try and get to that point. Come on. Okay, so it's got these threads, and you may end up in a situation kind of like that, where the thing just drops off inside of there. If it's like stuck down inside of the pen and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't grab it, what am I gonna do? Okay, no big deal. All you gotta do is thread the thing back on there, get it in place a little bit, kind of rethread it, and then you should be able to grab enough of it to be able to pull it out, okay? Or you can get a pair of tweezers or something. I wouldn't use pliers because it's plastic and you wouldn't want to get that, but, and then you can see inside the body there, ta-da, neat. Okay, so there's 5 different pieces technically in this piston mechanism. This is the similar mechanism to the 580 and the Mini. Nothing drastically different here. So if you're really familiar with those, you're going to know how this works. Technically, these pieces come off. I don't know why you would really want to take them apart. I wouldn't recommend doing it a lot because the risk that you could damage the piston rod or something like that is greater than the benefit that you will have from removing that. So I wouldn't really recommend taking that apart. I just did it so that I could show you. Now, the parts that are operating here are these two. So these are what's getting all the work done, okay? So they're moving, rocking and rolling there. And then you've got all threads all over the place here. So this thing is all operating by threads. So this piece, the filler knob, is threading onto here. And then these two parts are inside here and threading on each other, and that's what's actually moving the piston rod up and down, like so. And because this piece is threading onto here, they're kind of moving in opposite directions of each other. So as the filler knob is threading this way, the piston rod is threading this way. So as you're reassembling this thing, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to try to get it to the point where the filler knob is threaded all the way in place and the piston rod is threaded all the way in place. And that's the tricky part of getting all this done. But before I get to that, I do want to just throw a little silicone grease on here, because if you're taking this whole thing apart, a lot of the benefit of doing all this work is so that you can clean out the pen, you can grease up the piston rod here, grease up this piston seal so that it moves smoothly inside the pen. That's a lot of the benefit. Now, TWSBI does supply a little thing of silicone grease. I don't really like it as much because it's kind of runny a little bit and it's kind of hard to get out of the jar, I've found. Me personally, you know, I obviously have tons of access to my own silicone grease, so that's what I use, but you know, you can use the TWSBI supplied stuff, you know, does work obviously just fine because that's what they use, so it works. Just rub a little bit here in place. It's a double seal, so this thing should operate really nicely. And then I just throw a little bit onto these threads as well so that that part operates nice and smoothly. And then now I'm at the point where I've got to try to get this thing threaded in place, and that's the tricky part. Okay, so you may notice that I've got ink all over my fingers here. I had to shoot this segment on a different day because my battery died yesterday as I was trying to put this thing on, and so, you know, go figure. So anyway, that's why I magically have black ink all over my fingers. Anyway, I'm back to reassembling the TWSBI here. The trickiest part about reassembling this thing is getting the piston to be in the right place so that you're getting a full ink capacity, because this piston rod is threaded, and depending on where you have this thing threaded in place will make a difference as to how much ink capacity you'll have in your pen. And that's because it can thread in multiple places here. So for example, I have here where the filler knob is tight all the way in as far as it'll go, but the piston rod is not inserted all the way. So if I was to actually insert it back into the pen like this, that's how far up it would go. Instead of up further like it would need to be, I'd lose about half my ink capacity. So the trick with this is to try to get it so that the piston is all the way back here against the back of the mechanism so that you have the maximum amount of space inside the pen for your ink to be stored. Now doing that is a little tricky, especially if you actually separate the piston rod from the rest of the mechanism in removing it, because then you got to get it back in place and you got to get it in the right place. So the way that I found is easiest to do this is to go ahead and grab the mechanism and to twist the filler knob pretty much all the way until it won't go anymore. Not really tight, but just twist until it won't go anymore. And then let out on it just a little bit. And then go ahead and stick the piston rod down in there, and then holding it with your fingers like so on the black part of the piston mechanism, and then with your forefinger up on the piston seal, go ahead and twist the filler knob so that it's in there. And that will thread the rod in, and at the point where it stops, that's where you're going to want it to be when it's actually in the pen and in the full closed position. But this is as far as the piston rod's going. So I need to get this thing so that it's going further down in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unscrew the piston knob, the filler knob, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure here on the end of the piston seal. And as I'm doing that, it's going to give me a little bit of a click. I can feel it, I can hear it a little bit, but it's more of a feeling. And then I will go and screw it back in. And you'll notice it's a little bit shorter this time. So I'm going to do it again. Just clicked. Okay, I got to go a couple more. There's another one. So it's gone a little further. Another one. Okay, need to go a little further. A little further. Okay, that right there is where I want it to ultimately end up. I want it to be so that there's a tiny little bit of space. It should be less space, less length that I can see on the piston rod than there is length of the piston seal itself. If I continue to go even further to try to get even more, I can over thread it in there. And when I do that, the thing will go down really far, but it's not going to want to pull out at all. And the problem that you're going to have when you do that is if you go to reassemble it and the rod is too far in place, I'll go ahead and temporarily reassemble it just to show you what's going to happen in this situation. Okay, that's installed. I'm going to go to install this, but it's going to be threaded too tightly in there. And that's not going to allow me to tighten the filler knob all the way onto the body of the pen. So it's going to give me not any significant amount more of space here inside the body, but the filler knob is going to be loosey-goosey and it's not going to fit tightly. So if you end up in that situation, you know you've taken it in too far. And you got to disassemble the pen again and start over. But in this case, I know I don't have that far to go, so I'm just going to unscrew it a little bit, feed it back in here, and get it back to that ideal position. Okay, I took it too far there. So take it back in, voila. Okay, I got to go one more. Bam. Nope. One more. Okay, that's where I want it to be. And then when you go to reinstall this thing, it's pretty straightforward. This might be the point where you want to throw a little bit of silicone grease on here. I did put some on already, but now most of it's on my fingers. So this is probably the more ideal time when you want to put silicone grease on there. So go ahead and grease it up. Nice. Okay, so then I'll insert it in here. And as I'm inserting it in here, I'm threading it in one direction. So it's actually going to thread in the counterclockwise direction. However, the filler knob here is going to thread in the opposite direction. So it's going to go for a little bit, but then as soon as it gives me a little bit of resistance, that filler knob is going to start to undo from the mechanism itself. That's going to be okay, except it's not going to be very tight in there, so I just got to take the wrench and I got to give it a little bit of a twist in the counterclockwise direction, like maybe a quarter turn, and then it's in there nice and tight and I don't have to worry about the action of undoing the filler knob, pulling the mechanism out of the whole pen. And then to double check to make sure that I've gotten my ink capacity right, I take that toothpick that I used earlier as a marker for how far it is. I make sure that filler knob's all the way up there so the piston's seal is all the way down, and I put that in there and I See my little tick mark? That's exactly where it measured before I took the mechanism out, and I know that I've put it back in correctly. At that point, I can take my nib, I can reinstall it on my pen, making sure to kind of hold it by the metal part up top there, and then I'm ready to fill the pen and be on my merry way. You should probably get a medal at this point for having stuck this far through the end of the video. I don't really have much value to add at this point, except that I should say that if you have any additional questions or comments about taking apart your TWSBI Classic, or about anything else TWSBI or anything else fountain pen related, you can leave me a comment on YouTube or on Ink Nouveau, or you can hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, and I will do my absolute best to try to help you out of the jam that you may have gotten yourself into. So thanks so much for watching my video today, and right on.